What's up everybody, it's Kenjack and I'm going to give you 10 horror movies that are currently on streaming that I think you're going to love. Let's start out with The Shining on HBO Max. For those of you that have never seen The Shining before, which I really hope is just very few people because it's one of the iconic and most classic horror movies of all time, it's about a family that's up and isolated in the mountains and they slowly start to go insane, namely the father, and he goes full on, here's Johnny! It's both Kubrick and Jack Nicholson at their absolute peaks. I mean, it's I think, respectively speaking, for their jobs in this role, like as an actor and as a director, I think they really just gave the performances of their lives. It's creepy and anxiety-inducing in the best possible way, and Jack Nicholson just scares the absolute shit out of me in it, and he wasn't the only choice for the role either. The studio also looked at Harrison Ford, Robin Williams, and Robert De Niro. Here's Johnny. That was really bad, I'm sorry. Next up is 28 Days Later on Hulu. It's about a guy who is in a coma and he wakes up in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, or should I say 28 days into a zombie apocalypse. It's so good, and it's one of the best zombie movies I would say in the last 2 decades, despite not really being a zombie movie. The infected are just horrifying, violent, just relentless and scary as shit, mostly because they're so fast. I've said this before a million times, anytime that there are fast zombies or any sort of zombie with like quick twitch muscles, just fucking kill me right off the bat. I don't want to live in that world. One of the things I really like about this movie is that they really went to great lengths to make sure that it stayed practical and looked real. There's scenes where they're walking around a desolate and empty London, and that's not done with CGI. That was Danny Boyle actually getting bridges and streets and big touristy areas shut down so that he could film it and make it look real. Speaking of zombies, next up is Overlord on Amazon Prime Video and Hulu. Basically, a bunch of American paratroopers on D-Day get sent to destroy a Nazi radio tower, but it turns out to be a secret lab where they're trying to make more or less Nazi zombies. It's definitely more on the action-y side of horror, but that doesn't make it any less scary. Nazi zombies are really gross and just disgusting, and the way they manipulate their bodies and make all these cracking sounds, it's just really, really gross.
What's wrong with him? I don't know.
Really, really gross. I really like Jovan Adepo in the lead role, but I really, really love Pilou Asbæk as the role as the Nazi zombie, let's say. The Nazi zombie general. I would also consider it to be a little bit underrated. It just needs more eyes on it. It's got good action, good horror, and relatively quick. Next is The Invitation on Netflix. It's a really, really tense sort of horror suspense thriller-ish movie, and it's about a guy who gets invited to dinner by his ex-wife and her new husband, and the dinner turns out to be a little bit more nefarious than they planned, which is sort of a shitty way to put it, but that's the best I could do it without spoiling it, and I really don't want to spoil anything about this movie. It's definitely not like a super gore fest or anything crazy like that, but it definitely takes that tension and anxiety building up to a whole different level. You'll be as afraid and as full of dread during this as you would be during any regular horror movie. And like Overlord, I would also consider this to be pretty underrated because not many people saw it. Next up is His House on Netflix. This is a new movie that kind of blends the house horror genre with this immigrant family story, and it's really, really good. Sort of like The Invitation, it's not some huge bloody gory mess or anything like that, but it's super, super tense, and again, gonna prey on your anxieties a lot, especially during the second and third act. You're really gonna be on the edge of your seat. Next up is The Host on Hulu. This is a monster movie from the director of Parasite, Memories of Murder, Snowpiercer, and so much more, the one and only Bong Joon-ho. It also stars a familiar face for those of you that have seen those movies I just mentioned, in Kang Ho-sung. So it's definitely very scary, but it's also partially a satire of the genre, and it has a little bit of let's say political undertones to it as well. And I just think you're really, really gonna like it, and it's as much like a human story as it is a monster one. Next up is Scanners on HBO Max. It's about people born with these psychic and telekinetic powers that start to try to take over the world, and one guy who tries to stop them. Most people probably know this movie for the very famous head explosion scene, but it's so much more than that. It's from David Cronenberg, who's one of the most unique minds in all of horror. He did The Fly, Videodrome, so much more. It has the label of cult classic, but I really do think it's more than that. It's a good fucking movie. Body horror in general is it's a true forgotten art that I think more people should get back into. Next is The Blair Witch Project on Netflix. It's about a bunch of young people that get stuck out in the woods while they're researching an old legend called the Blair Witch. Now this movie scared the absolute and total living shit out of me as a kid. I grew up with a very, very small woods in my backyard, and I literally could not go out into my backyard at night for like probably 5 years after I watched this movie because it frightened me so much. Just something's gonna happen to me the second I step out of the door. It's really a benchmark for the found footage genre. You know, it just, I do think it holds up very well, and I still think that the way that they weaved horror into that movie, and without spending too much money, or without using effects, without using anything, just using, you know, very simple camera techniques and tension building, is amazing. Next up is Midsommar on Prime Video. It's about a woman who goes on a trip to Sweden to escape some grief and ends up trapped in this very fucked up scenario. Again, pretty simple way of putting it, but I don't want to spoil anything. It's from Ari Aster, the same guy who did Hereditary, and that guy, I'll tell you what, he knows how to take grief, put it on screen, and make you feel it. He's also just a really good filmmaker in general. You know, a lot of horror movies or horror movie directors, I should say, they settle for really cheap techniques, you know, jump scares and shit like that. He does not do that. Aster is a very legit filmmaker, and his movies are extremely well made, which makes the actual horror, like the vessel that it's for, so much better. Next is The Wailing on Prime Video. It's a supernatural horror movie about people getting possessed and killing their families, and this cop who's trying to make sense of it all and figure out why people are doing this. It's a pretty long movie, but it's very rewarding. The end, I would say, like the final half hour in general, are really just like mind-fucking. Plus, I mean, look at this thing. Just look at this thing. Make sure to go to movierankings.net. You can sort by genre and find all these other great horror movies on whatever streaming service you want. Make sure to comment below whatever horror movies you might think I missed or aren't showing enough love to. As always, remember to like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. Subscribing helps us out a ton, and I'm sure I'm the only YouTuber to ever tell you that in your entire life. See you guys back on Friday with a Bad Batch recap with Robbie and Clem, but until then, I'm Ken Jack. See you next time.